bit of background about the webinar. Alzheimer's New Zealand asked Litmus to do research what it is like to live with dementia. For the research, they talked to people with dementia, their care partners, and couples living with dementia. Now, Liz would like to share what she learned from listening to 49 New Zealanders living with dementia. These people generously shared the stories of their lives after receiving a dementia diagnosis, the support services they need, how they live meaningful lives, and the impact on their relationships. In this webinar, Liz will share 6 findings from the research. She has chosen these findings as they made her reflect on her understanding of dementia and challenged her attitudes. Just a wee bit about Liz. Liz is a co-founding partner of Litmus, a leading research, evaluation and design agency in New Zealand. Liz has a curious mind. She is a solution seeker. She never claims to know the right answer, but she has the tools and expertise to find one. Liz is a champion for equitable health and disability services. She believes people's stories matter. Understanding people's lives are central to creating positive system and social change. Liz has led research into the lives of disabled people, people living with cancer, families with disabled children, people living remotely, and those living with addictions.
Thank you, Alister, and thank you, John. And I'd just like to say kia ora koutou to everybody who is on the webinar today. It's a real privilege to come and present the research of living with dementia in New Zealand. And I'm going to sort of share my slides because I want to show you where I am in New Zealand. Is it okay to share my slides now, John? Yep.
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely.
Before I do, I have a confession. I have never done a webinar before, so I'm a little nervous. And I would ask Alister or John if I'm doing anything wrong, like moving around too much, disappearing off the screen, talking too fast. Just let me know and to make sure that I can present as best I can today. So I thought I'd start by just sort of sharing where I am today. So I'm currently sitting in Hamilton, where it's very chilly and cold, and I started my day by promptly falling over. But I actually live in Wellington, down in New Zealand, which is the dot down at the bottom of the North Island. Today I wanted to give a bit of an overview to tell you a little bit about me, because Alister said I had to do that. Tell you how we did the research, the challenges we faced, and then go through some of the research findings. And then I wanted to end by just talking about how the research is currently being used. So first, a little bit about me. And thank you, Alister, for that wonderful introduction. I felt quite embarrassed when you were doing it, but that was really kind of you. I'm a co-founding partner of Litmus, and we do specialise in qualitative research evaluation in the health and disability sector, both in New Zealand and working across Asia Pacific as well. But I'm originally from Northern Ireland. I grew up in the 70s and 80s during the infamous times of the Troubles. And I actually started my career as a nurse back in the day in the Royal Victoria Hospital in Belfast. I did the old-fashioned nurse training, and I always saw it as very foundational for my life and the research that I do today, because it's all about people and caring about people and their outcomes. I finished my training at nursing, and then I headed off to work in the John Radcliffe Hospital in Oxford. And at that time, I decided I needed to actually get a degree, because I didn't have a degree having done nurse-based or hospital-based training. So I was really privileged to actually do my degree at the John Brooks University up on the hill in Headington in Oxford. And I studied sociology there, and that's really where my journey into research began, and my sort of love for really finding out about people and about their lives. I should say, when I was in Oxford, it was when I met my husband, and that's how I ended up in New Zealand. My husband, Chris, came over to watch the All Blacks play in the 1991 Rugby World Cup. The All Blacks didn't win. It was Australia. So any Australians watching today, well done. But at least I always think he got the girl, even if they didn't get the cup. In 92, I moved to Wellington, New Zealand. And here I started to work for private sector agencies, doing social research for government agencies around Wellington. And in 2001, I thought it would be a fantastic idea to actually, after having given birth to my second son, to really start a business, as you do. As women, we tend to take on quite a lot at the times when you've got other things going on. So I started Litmus 18 years ago, and Litmus and my son are both thriving, so I feel I'm achieving something well at this point in time. I'm not going to go through what I do. I think Alister covered that marvellously, as that I love quality of research. I love hearing people's stories. And I think people's stories and understanding people's lives are actually really, really important when we think about developing health systems and disability support systems for people. Because if we don't understand those realities, people sit in the bureaucracies and determine what they think is right without really understanding how people are living and the challenges they face. Other things about me, I'm currently learning Te Reo Māori and go to yoga twice a week, but I still can't touch my toes. But enough about me. I hope that met Alister's needs of giving you a bit of background about who I am and where I'm from. But I'll now move on to tell you a little bit more about the research. So the research we did is called lived experience research. And it's one of those fancy terms that researchers tend to use. But basically what Alzheimer's New Zealand asked us to do was to tell the story of the lives of people living with dementia in New Zealand. And it's a story told in their words. So we weren't looking to write an academic piece. We were looking to write a story that really presented people's lives as they are. So in the interviews, we listened to the stories of their lives after they received a dementia diagnosis, the support services they needed, how they're living well, and also the impact that dementia had on their relationships. We did interviews in 5 regions in New Zealand, and the interviews lasted for up to an hour, and people were invited to bring a support person. We also gave everyone a small gift for taking part, recognising the importance of their contribution, and invited people to come to the Alzheimer's New Zealand conference. That was last year, I think it was September, to sort of hear some of the preliminary sort of findings and reflections. And then we also, about a month ago, went back out around New Zealand to present the finding back to participants. And for me, that was a really important part of the research. It's about sharing what we heard and what we found out about from the people back to them. And to me, my big reflection going back to talk to people with dementia about the research learnings was actually saying that their journey was continuing on, and things were continuing to change and evolve. So I have to start by saying thank you. I have to say thank you to the 49 people who welcomed us into their homes and shared their stories openly. And I found meeting the people was just a fantastic privilege. I learned so much through the process. Personally learned a lot through the process of the research. And I do acknowledge that the stories at times, they were told through laughter, and they were also told through tears. So they were very challenging stories and uplifting stories to hear. So how did we do this research? Actually, I'm going to start with how did I get involved in the research? Alzheimer's New Zealand put out the brief for the research early last year, and they sent it out to 3 agencies in New Zealand and academics. And when the brief came out, we talked about the potential to do this work with our team, and it became really obvious that everybody in our research team had actually either been supporting people living with dementia or knew of people who lived with dementia. And personally for me, my grandmother, she had vascular dementia, and her mother had vascular dementia. This is actually a picture of my mum. She's in her 80s. She doesn't have dementia now, but she worries that because of the history, that might be something that she's going to face. So it was very personal for a lot of the researchers there, and we really wanted to do the research and to do it really well and to respect the people's stories and make sure that they were heard. So we were absolutely thrilled when Alzheimer's New Zealand picked us as the agency to do this research. So how did we do it? Well, to design the research, we started off by actually reviewing the literature about involving people living with dementia in the research. And I guess it was to great surprise and some great disappointment, we actually learned that people with dementia are often excluded from research about their lives due to concerns about their ability to give consent and also the potential to do harm. And looking at the literature, we also noted that a lot of times the research focused on the experience of care partners or family members trying to tell the story of people living with dementia in their words. Now, this is not to say the care partner's story is not important. It is a very important story, but it's not the story of personally living with dementia. Positively, what we did find, though, that is in the words of Bob Dylan, the times they are a-changing, and people with dementia were starting to demand the right to be included in research. And it's through organisations like Dementia Alliance International, the work of the Scottish Dementia Working Research Subgroup, the Dementia Engagement Empowerment Project, are all being driven by people living with dementia, and they're demanding the right to be involved, not just in interviews about living with dementia, but at all stages of the research process. And when we were developing the research design, we leaned very heavily on the work of these agencies. And particularly, we used the core principles from the Scottish Dementia Working Group research. And these are the principles that we tried to adhere to when we were doing this research. So it was important for us to involve and value and keep people with dementia informed about the research at all stages. And to recognise that knowledge comes from all sorts of places and to value the knowledge of people with dementia. So we established a research advisory group, and Alister was on that group. And they provided us advice and guidance on all stages of the research, from the design through to conducting the interviews, through to our analysis and reporting. We also consulted with Alzheimer's New Zealand's advisory group, which is people with dementia and also care partners on it. And as I've talked about, we also gave feedback to the participants who were involved in the research. So people with dementia were involved in defining the scope. And some of the key insights, if I go back to when we were actually sitting around the table thinking about, well, who do we include, who do we not include in this research? It was Alister, I remember you saying very clearly about, we had initially thought we would include people living with dementia who had a diagnosis, but they didn't actually acknowledge it. And he talked to us about, well, actually, if you do that, you're potentially going to create an awful lot of upset and harm to these people. So again, his wisdom and his perspective was really key in making sure that we thought very carefully about what we were doing and who we were including. Alister worked with us closely in testing the research tools, from the processes of recruiting people through to the interviews, and he kindly was himself and some of his friends sort of guinea pigs for us to actually make sure the interview guides worked as well as they should do. And they also helped us in refining the process and thinking about the role of care partners in recruitment. For me, one of the most important inputs that people with dementia had was reviewing our draft report. We had the draft report reviewed by the Research Advisory Group, which also included not just people living with dementia, care partners, it also included a number of leading academics in New Zealand. But for me, the academic feedback was great, it was interesting. But I remember my feeling was, if the report didn't resonate with Alister and the other care partners who were involved in the research, we would really have not, would have failed at the research, because for me, they were the real sort of acid test for us of whether this research would resonate with other people living with dementia. Thankfully it did, and again, Alister gave us some really useful insights in terms of our language that we were using and how to really present issues in a way that dealt with the subtlety and the nuances. We also worked, coming back to the principles, in ensuring safe and secure environments and doing the research. We did the interviews in people's homes, or places where they were most comfortable. We used the DEEP guidelines to really make sure our language was clear and to avoid stigmatizing language. We also did some training in becoming more dementia aware ourselves. And I think my reflection as we went into the research, because I have a nursing background, because I've had family members who have had dementia, I felt, oh, I know, I understand this, I get it. But really, I didn't. There was a lot to learn to understand how best to be working and doing research when working with people with dementia. We also had to learn how to keep to dementia time and not research time. Now, I'm going to say we worked hard to align to these principles. But on the first day of the interviewing, when we were doing the pre-test interviews in Napier, not everything went as intended. So I think I'll share you how the wheels fell off for me on the first day. So I was sort of feeling quite confident. We'd sort of gone through the whole process, and this is going to be our first interviews with people living with dementia. So when arriving at the first house, I suddenly realized I had left my tape recorder back at the hotel, and I needed the tape recorder to record the interview. So I had to tell the participant, who was eagerly waiting to take part, that I had to go back to the hotel to pick up my tape recorder. So I arrived back about 20 minutes later, quite flustered, late for the interview. So I tried to sort of play a bit of catch up, and then for my next interview, I put the wrong address into the GPS and I ended up in the wrong place. So again, I arrived late to the interview, feeling very flustered and very cross with myself. And I also realized that the interviews had been booked too close together. They'd been booked, right, do an interview, get to the next one, do another interview. There was no time for sort of that pause after you had the interview, have a cup of tea, have a bit of a chat. So I had lunch and I had a stern talking to myself. And the next interview, thankfully, I did arrive at time. So we didn't align with the principles that day. I did not deliver what I should be doing. But it was actually the less than perfect start we had was a really important insight for the research team and for myself about really sort of slowing down, thinking about what we're doing. So we learned the importance of making sure we had enough time so that we could be very calm, that we could be present, and to have enough time to sort of for the interviews to extend out and just having a cup of tea, having a further chat, because people got really interested in telling their story. So that was my personal learning on my first day. I did get better, I'd say, as I went forward. I learned through that process. But our biggest challenge I feel we faced is when we went into ethics, through the ethics process. So research ethics is very important, and there has been incidents in New Zealand, and I'm sure around the world, where research ethics have not been adhered to, and it's been to the detriment and harm to people who have been involved in research. So it was an important process for us to go through the ethics research process. So we submitted our research plan and our research tools to the Ministry of Health and Disability Ethics Committee for review. And the committee is required to really get assurance that the research process align with the New Zealand's legal frameworks and the Code of Patients' Rights within New Zealand. The key challenge we faced with the ethics committee is they were very concerned about how we were going to determine whether a person with dementia had the cognitive capacity to consent to do the research. And they wanted us as social researchers to do clinical cognitive assessment to determine capacity to consent. Now, our research plan had no processes for doing clinical assessment, and we believed that that was inappropriate for us. First, it would be intrusive. It would also be potentially very upsetting, and it was outside our skill set. We also thought we then had proposed a process where we would do a series of informed consent, talking both before the interview and the recruitment stage, at the interview and post the interview, and sort of working in a very staged way. But this did not meet the requirements of the ethics committee, and they were not happy with the processes we had put forward. So we had to find an appropriate consent process to use, or we couldn't proceed with the research without the ethics committee. So we were very thrown by this request, because as social researchers, we felt the research was quite low risk. We weren't doing an intervention. It was basically asking people to tell their story as much or as little as they wanted in their own words. And we were very clear to people, you could talk for a long time, you could talk for a little time, you could share personal things, or share very little, really what was up to them on the day. So to meet the ethics requirement, we had a look through the literature again, and we actually sought some expert advice about appropriate tools to use by social researchers to assess capacity to consent. So we adopted the older adults' capacity to consent to do research scale. And this is really, it's from Lee, the reference is down there if anyone wants it. The scale asks 4 questions, and we use these questions both at recruitment and then again before commencing the interview. So it asks people, after we've gone through the informed information sheet, we then said to people, so what do you think the purpose of the research is? Can you tell me some of the things you might be asked about? Are there anything worrying you about this research? And do you know that if you don't want to take part, you don't have to? So those are really important questions for us. But we realized that people living with dementia, you know, some would be able to answer those questions well, and some may not answer them as well. So what we did is we said people reached an informed consent process if they can answer all 4 questions. We used supported decision making if people understood the purpose for the research, and also if they knew that they didn't have to take part. We did exclude people if they couldn't answer questions 1 and 2, what is the purpose, and then not knowing that they didn't have to take part. So some people didn't meet the criteria. Adopting this scale does align with best practice research, but I guess for the research team, there was a real aha moment for us in this, because this is not just about, you know, can people living with dementia consent to take part in research. All research should involve these questions. No one should take part in research if they don't understand the purpose, or if they don't understand that they don't have to take part. So we strongly believe this is not a scale for just using with people living with dementia. This is a scale for anyone taking part in research, be that young mothers talking about having a newborn baby, talking about immunizations, or having discussions on disability rights. So it's something that could be used across the research, and it's something that we're embedding across our research processes and all projects. I should say we did test the tool. Again, Alister and his friends gave us a lot of feedback on using it, and we were really wanting to make sure that people living with dementia were comfortable with the processes that we were adopting. We did have one concern using the scale, and it was really whether we were excluding people from taking part in the research. And this goes back to my initial surprise about researchers putting up barriers about who and who can't actually share their stories. And we do believe we did exclude people in the research from taking part, and they tended to be people with more advanced dementia were excluded as a result of using this scale. So as a result, their story wasn't included, and so they are silent in this research. We did talk to care partners of people living with advanced dementia, but again, it's a story from the care partner's perspective, not from the person living with dementia. Before leaving ethics, there was one regret I had in this whole research process. During the ethics process, we had asked if we could tell individual stories. So having done the interviews, we wanted to pick about 4 or 5 people whose story we could write up as a sort of a vignette about this is their lives, and potentially have a picture. And we were going to do a process of writing it up, sending it back to the person living with dementia, getting them to sign it off, see if they're feeling comfortable with having that story published. And there is incidents of this being done in the UK, but we were told that we couldn't do that. And I guess we took the easy route because we thought we actually need to move forward with the research. So we didn't push back. But in having completed the report, I think it would have been a richer story if we could have shared a much more sort of an overview picture of somebody's life. So that's something I sometimes, my reflection was about sort of stopping and really thinking, do we want to push back more? And some of these, I guess how people are thinking about doing research with people living with dementia. So that was sort of our story to get to actually do the research. So let me share some of the findings. I'm going to just sort of start with a Māori proverb, and I love this proverb because it's he aha te mehe nui o te ao, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. What is the most important thing in the world? It is the people, it is the people, it is the people. This research was all about the people. So what we learned that people living with dementia have very diverse lives. And I always remember when Alister reviewed the report, he sort of said, you know, this confirms that there's no one experience of dementia. And what we saw was the experience varied, depended on people's age, on their gender, on their ethnicity, on their symptoms and their stage of the progression, the support they could receive, on their income. We found people who had personal income, were financially secure, were able to access more services, but also personal preferences. Not everybody wants the same things. We also learned that people with dementia go through ongoing cycles of loss, grief, and acceptance. So as the dementia progresses, people were talking about, grieving for what they were losing, but also saying how important it was to come to a sense of acceptance. But they did acknowledge, even when they were reaching that part of acceptance, they could still feel sad, depressed, angry when they felt on the reflection of their life. So it was a very dynamic process. I'll just do a quote. One man, he said, "From my perspective, it is what it is. I don't like the thought of where it's going, but I have no problem accepting where I'm going. But I'd rather not go there. But I think it's my concept in life that allows me to accept it." And we heard that quite a lot about people saying you have to be able to come to terms and to accept it and not to get too anxious. A key finding we heard, stop touching the buttons. A key thing we heard from people living with dementia is they really were telling us, yes, we are forgetful, but we're also intelligent. So most people describe dementia as becoming more forgetful or taking longer to understand or process information. But they also said that they could think, they could reason, particularly if they're given the time and the support to do it. And a couple of quotes up here. So one person with dementia, a man, said, "I don't think I've lost my intellect. I follow the news. I've always been a thinker, and I still am." But as one woman explained, not everybody sees people with dementia this way. And she said, a lot of people treat me differently, and that made it harder. And I thought, I'm just a normal person, really. But I felt like I was really down. So it gave us how other people were seeing people living with dementia. People with dementia told us that they want a say in their lives, but at times they feel that they have little control. Independence is really important to people with dementia. They realized over time, changes due to dementia will affect their ability to live independently. And their desire for ongoing independence can create tensions with families. And a quote here from a woman who said, "I still want some control over my affairs and how things are done. The kids are more inclined to tell me what I should be doing. And I sometimes don't take their advice after thinking it through. And they have to learn that that's okay too." People with dementia told us that they're not given time, the information, or support to make their own decisions. And at times they feel pushed to do what others think is right or best for them. One man explained, he said, "People with quite advanced dementia can still reason, given the opportunity to do so. And that's what I've been saying all the time, wherever I go. Give me the time to think it through." So with some changes, people with dementia told us that they can live meaningful lives. Now, society in New Zealand tends to define people with dementia by stigmatized views of the end stages of the disease. And in this context, the idea of living a meaningful life with dementia seems strange and out of place. One care partner explained, and he said, "The one thing that I would really emphasize is that whilst the diagnosis is traumatic, and it is very traumatic, we believe you can go on and live a meaningful life with some changes." Now, people with dementia told us about how they created a meaningful life. They told us it was best not to worry, to accept the diagnosis, and to keep active and keep engaged. One man told us about his love for going to the gym every day. He spent about an hour and a half on the rowing machine, did about 600 meters in an hour. And he said, "I don't rush it, but I get going. I love going to the gym." So one of the questions we had was thinking about, well, what does it mean by having a meaningful life? And again, I think for most of us, it is a lot of it's to do with the simple things in life. It's about enjoying being with your family, helping to support and care for your family, spending time with friends. Some people enjoyed going for walks, biking, films, visits to the pub. Others helped out neighbours or grandchildren. We heard of people loving being able to help if other neighbours were stuck. I can hang out the washing if they're not feeling well. I look after my grandchildren. Others are advocates for people, older people, or those living with dementia. Some people weren't the joiners, but they gained a lot of pleasure through their gardening, their knitting, or other more solo hobbies. So as one woman explained, I like being busy. I like my life to be occupied. I don't like sitting around reading. And I guess people with dementia living meaningful lives, it really made me recognize my own bias, because I was quite surprised by how active, how adventuresome some people living with dementia are. I mean, I heard stories of people ziplining, kayaking up rivers at dusk to look at glowworms. I heard stories of people composing music for their family. I heard of people biking 200 kilometers plus up around the Coromandel. And I came away actually thinking, gosh, my life is actually quite boring compared to theirs. And I should actually take a leaf out of their book and be a little bit more adventuresome. So last year, when I was presenting at the Alzheimer's conference, I had the afternoon free and I decided I would jump off the Sky Tower and get myself out of my comfort zone. So thanks to interviewing people with dementia, I did do the jump, but never again. I think you've got to stick to what you're comfortable with. I'm keeping my feet firmly on the ground from now on, and I'll stick to my yoga even though I still can't touch my toes. But it did make me think, and it made me think about my biases. I've talked about living a meaningful life, and when we were preparing the report, we were very conscious about there is a positive story to tell, but it is not easy to live a meaningful life in New Zealand. And there are a number of challenges that people with dementia face, and I'm going to talk about those now. The first is that getting a diagnosis in New Zealand is difficult. People talked about delaying seeking medical advice. They weren't sure what the symptoms were, and some were just thinking, oh, it's just old age, I'll not worry. And others were scared because they felt if family members had dementia that it could be that, and they didn't want to know. What tended to happen is there'd be a crisis. People would have a fall, there might be a car crash or another illness. Something would happen that would prompt a visit to the general GP or general practitioner. Or it might be a family member noticing that things were getting pretty tough at home. But even when they went to the GP, people talked about a very difficult 12 months or more in trying to get a diagnosis. And what we also heard, that people in New Zealand have very different experiences with their GP. Some doctors were very good in supporting people through the diagnosis. But unfortunately, we also heard a lot of stories where the GP just signed the person off. And this quote sort of sadly sums, that the GP signed me off, more or less. He didn't want to see me anymore, just gave me some pills. Said, there you go. Not much we can do here. You're not as bad as some. Keep taking the pills. If it gets worse, come and see us. Being diagnosed, we also heard, with dementia is a very fearful time, an uncertain time. And some people felt that the life that they enjoyed was over and that the future could look very bleak. And this sense of bleakness was really reinforced as well when health professionals had limited understanding of living with dementia, and they had a lack of empathetic support, and it really heightened the fear. So a couple of quotes again from people we talked to. One chap said, I'll never forget the day walking out of the office to the car. We were just stunned. When you think of the word Alzheimer's, you think of the last stages. And that's a picture people will have. Another reflected on how his doctor had treated him when he was told he had dementia. He said, you're given the impression, go home, put your affairs in order and wait. Well, we felt, what was going to happen to us? Go home, put your affairs in order, that's it. People living with dementia also need access to a range of support services to live well. Care partners are a main source of support for people with dementia. And people with dementia also told us about accessing a range of services, from daily living service, socialising, connecting services, support groups, educational sessions. But getting the right health and disability support services in New Zealand at the right time is difficult. I was surprised to learn that many people don't know what's available. And I've got a quote here that explains how difficult it is. And the man said, "Nobody offers help. You've got to go and find it and ask for it. You have to go to your doctor. And some doctors don't want to give the information," which seems quite strange. So there's a real sense of people with dementia, their care partners, really having to seek out what is available. People talked about not being taken seriously when they asked for support, or only getting help when they reach a crisis point. And even when they have services, they don't know how to actually get more services as the dementia progresses. And services are also, their availability also varies across New Zealand. So again, they talk about a postcode lottery in New Zealand about what services that you can receive. When we were presenting back this finding in Tauranga to a group, there was a care partner and her husband there, and he was in a wheelchair. And they sort of really, the point about reaching a crisis point really struck home to them. And she laughed and he laughed. He said, "We're always joking that every now and again when we need more help, I say to him, well, you just got to fall out of the wheelchair again and then we'll get some more support." Because that was how it was triggering support for them. And it was a beautiful example to us as well as the dark humour. There's a lot of humour used as a coping mechanism by people living with dementia. And I should say, it was said a joke and she wasn't going to push him out of the wheelchair. So. And here's the quote that sort of reflects that. "It takes a crisis to get help, like when he had a fall and he went to hospital. Then the GP said it, you need more help." The other key area in New Zealand is there is a lack of respite care for people with dementia. And it's not just the lack of respite care, but it's quality, fit for purpose respite care. And people with dementia really sort of felt there was a need for more respite care because of the pressure on care partners. But there was also a sense of making do. We heard back people talking about, I couldn't get through to respite care. They're very busy. They have a big list. And they seem to be prepared to wait, to put up. We did, as I said, talk to care partners of people with advanced dementia. And what we heard from the care partners is they feel love, they feel loss, and they also feel guilt. The care partners tended to be spouses, or they could be children, and also in-laws. Care partners talked of their caring being based on a lifetime of love and commitment. But they also told us how their caring actually changed their lives, as they also had to adapt their lives to fit with the needs of the person living with dementia. We heard many times the importance of humour to cope with the changes. But care partners talked about their sense of loss, not just in terms of loss of the person they knew, but also the life they had, or the life, particularly for younger people, that they were dreaming of as they were reaching into retirement. As one care partner said, "It's just not fair. The person is still there, but you're losing them. I'm married to a stranger. It's getting to a stage where to her, I'm a stranger too." As the dementia progresses, care partners talked about roles changing and then taking on more responsibility. As one care partner explained, she's now thinking for two, when in their past they shared the load. Care partners also talked about stress is increasing as well as the dementia progresses. They also told us that they tended to put the needs of the person with dementia first, sometimes at the expense of their well-being. And again, they could reach crisis point. As this woman said, "I had years of managing. I was surviving on 2 or 3 hours sleep for the past 2 years. So my body just went, I can't do this anymore. As much as you want to carry on, your body says nah. And I knew I wasn't at my strongest." Our care partners felt relief, but they also felt a lot of guilt when a person with dementia was moved into residential care. As one daughter said, "My brother and I feel awful. We had to take these steps for her safety. We knew it had to be done. She's such a lovely mum and so independent." Mum's feeling is that she hopes she'll get better and back to her own home, and this caused a lot of stress and guilt for the daughter. That was a real high-level overview of the finding, but I guess the key takeouts for me is the stories of people living with dementia matter. And the research has shown that people with dementia can live meaningful lives, and they're contributing positively to their families and to their communities and to New Zealand. The research showcases the strength of people living with dementia to overcome challenges and to live the lives they want. But I think it also really shows that people with dementia can live even better lives. But to do this, people with dementia want the rest of us, for people in New Zealand, to understand dementia, to respect and include them in their lives, to offer support through difficult times, particularly at diagnosis, as the dementia is progressing, transition to residential care. People with dementia want us to give them time and information and support to make their own decisions. They want more health services and support services, but they want it tailored to the diverse needs. And they want to be able to get it when they need it. They also want support for their care partners so they can continue to care through caring for themselves. People with dementia offered the following words of advice to others diagnosed with dementia. They told us you need to come to terms with having dementia, not to worry too much, and try to live the best life you can. And in the words of one woman, she said, listen, don't worry about it, just don't. That's the last thing you do. Look after yourself. If you need help, ask for help. That's all you do. So we've done the research, and my biggest fear as a researcher is you've written another report, and the report sits on a shelf gathering a bit more dust, but nothing changes. But I'm really pleased to be here today to sort of tell you about the work that Alister and the Consumer Advisor Group have done at Alzheimer's New Zealand. And they've actually developed a Dementia Declaration for New Zealand. And the Dementia Declaration sets out 6 steps for a solution for government. It talks about investing in prevention, improving diagnosis and support, having provider services to support people to live at home, providing flexible, high-quality respite care, building aged, dementia-friendly communities, and monitoring progress. So some action is being taken, and the Dementia Declaration has been put out, and people around New Zealand have been asked to sign up to the declaration. But Alzheimer's New Zealand is also using the research in making submissions to government about support services. So they now have an evidence base of these are the stories and lives of people living with dementia. And that's very hard to refute. We're also working on an article with Stephen Langley at Alzheimer's New Zealand for primary care doctors, so for the general practitioners, for them to realise they have a very important role in supporting people who receive a diagnosis to understand that they can live meaningful lives. So just to conclude, I've got a quote here, again, another Māori saying or proverb. Nā rewa, nā tororo, nā ko tororo ka ora ai te iwi. With your food basket and my food basket, the people will thrive. So this is all about us working together to ensure people living with dementia can live the best lives. I'll just flick my last slide. That's the research team. So when these go up, and if you want to find the report, I've put a couple of links in there to the report. And that's me. So there's a couple of links to all of it, but I'll leave it on the Dementia Declaration. I think that's a good place to stop. Thank you for listening. I think I've talked too much. I hope that was interesting.
I would just like to actually just continue on about the Dementia Declaration. Because we've just heard from Liz about some of the fascinating and unique insights into the lived experiences of New Zealanders with dementia. And it's my great pleasure really to share with you what we at Alzheimer's New Zealand are calling the Dementia Declaration. This is a first for New Zealand's dementia community. It's a straightforward and to the point document that states exactly what people living with dementia need in our lives in order to live well, and it reflects very neatly the findings of the Our Lives Matter research. We've written the Dementia Declaration as a vehicle for change. Our declaration, because it is for all New Zealanders with dementia, is our way of educating society about what we need. It's our plea to be treated with respect, kindness, understanding and acceptance. It outlines our baseline requirements for the establishment of a more dementia-inclusive New Zealand. We are hoping our declaration will become a benchmark against which governments, organisations and individuals can measure themselves when they interact with and make policy for people just like me. And I'll just, as far as the declaration, our lives matter. We all want to be seen, valued, appreciated for, and loved for who we are. As New Zealanders living with dementia, we are citizens whose lives matter. We have the same rights, privileges and obligations as everyone else. Our declaration sets out what we need to live well. We live our best lives when we have control over our lives. We have support to make decisions that are important to us. We have consistent quality support, care and information which is timely, appropriate to us. It is provided with kindness by compassionate people who have the right skills and knowledge, our interests as a focus, and with whom we are comfortable. The circle of support protects our well-being, allowing us to maintain strong mutual relationships with our families, whānau, friends, colleagues, and those who are important to us. We live in knowledgeable communities that include, accept and understand us. We continue to be actively engaged in roles and activities which are meaningful and important to us. We have the things we need to live well, such as housing, privacy, and an adequate standard of living, and ways of getting where we need to go. We are loved, our presence matters. I am still me.